Good. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to my basement in my house. Oh, I just got done. I work a very early morning shift at my TV station, and it's kind of toward the end of my day. I have a dog upstairs, so hopefully he'll be very kind and cooperative. And I'm just so glad to be able to chat with you all and talk about my work and everything here. I know at one point I probably will be sharing a screen in just a bit so you can see a little bit of stuff that I do, and we'll have a nice little back and forth discussion. I'm just so eager. It's just what an honor. But my name's Annette, Annette Lawless. I work at the ABC affiliate here in Wichita, Kansas, and I just absolutely love my job. It's so much fun. I'm going to pop up here to share my screen from my desktop, just so you can get an idea of some of the stuff that I do and a little bit of the background of everything I do as well with missing people. So let's see if I can pop this up full screen for us. I'm not sure if I get this to play out properly. I'm gonna pop to the top here. Not that you can't see who I am or anything, but I've been a news anchor for a number of years here in Wichita. I've worked at tons of different places and had just a thrilling run at Wichita. I've worked in Cleveland. I had my very first job in Topeka, and it's just been a real joy to be a part of the business and to learn every day. I feel like every day, even though I've been in TV for about 16 years, I feel like every day you something's thrown at you and you have to figure it out. But a little background about me: I'm from Kansas State University is where I went to school. I am from Wellington, Kansas, though, so just a small town south of Wichita. Grew up here, spent most of my time here. My husband and I, we are just so blessed. I met him at one of the TV stations I worked at here in town. And we have 2 kids. We have another on the way, and we're just living our best life. But I've just had like I said, a really pretty amazing career that's led me all over the place. From Topeka is where I got my start. I moved to a station in Wichita, went to Cleveland for a few years in Ohio, loved it there, so great. And then I came back here to Wichita to pursue my anchoring job here at our TV station. I've done a number of different things. I've worked in film, done voiceover work, produced things like documentaries and podcasts. And I feel like in today's media world and with what we do in TV, you kind of need to do all of those things. You need to be capable of a whole lot. And I love picking up a camera. I still film just about a majority of the stuff that I do. And it's just so much fun. So I love exploring and trying to find new ways to showcase stories, because I kind of feel like, I don't know about you all, but I don't watch a ton of news, even though I work in the news. Like, I feel like sometimes you need a distance from some of the stuff that we showcase, but I do consume news in different ways, like through podcasts, or, maybe there's a really good social media site or something where I can get my consumption there. So I think it's really neat to be able to explore. In my time in TV, like I said, I've been an anchor. I produce news, which is essentially I'm just a news writer. So I'll write stuff that either I'll say on TV or maybe another person will read. And I do investigative work. And investigative work is kind of a bit more my bread and butter now. It's something that I've never explored until I really came here to Cake, which is really amazing. Cake, for those who aren't familiar with it, like I said, it's the ABC station here in Wichita. And we're kind of like, I would say we're definitely like a prized station for our owners. Like, we're one of their bigger TV stations, and we're also not just a flagship station in that regard of being one of them, kind of their pride and joy and everything. Not that their other stations aren't, but we're also this like legacy station in our community. Like, if you ask people, what do you know about Wichita news? People will say, oh, Cake News on your side. It's just something that's had such a rich history in our community, which is great because in its infancy, Cake was one of the very first TV stations in our region. And it was such a big deal. They were like, if not the number one of the top ABC stations in the country. And so they would send in like celebrities, and they'd beef up all this money behind investigations. And it was just so cool to see how much or how valued it was at that time. And it's still valued today, but because we do things just so different than what they did back in the 50s, it's neat to see that evolution. And I'm so proud to be a part of this legacy that we're leaving in our community. So one thing that certainly has influenced me in my time, like I said, is investigative work. And I never really got a grasp onto that until I moved to Ohio. And during my time in Ohio, I worked there from about 2009 to 2013. And it was such a big move for me. I've never lived out of state for a long time. And I was very much on my own, but I had just an amazing experience with my moment with Fox 8 News in Ohio. And one of the biggest things that I think impressed me during my time there was just how much they really emphasized on great storytelling. And one of the biggest stories that came about during the end of my tenure there was that of the Cleveland kidnapping survivors. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with their story, but it popped up in the spring of 2013. And here on the screen, you see from left to right, we have the 3 young women who were held captive in a man's house. And these women are Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight. And just a short backstory of them, they were held captive in his home for about 10 years. And the thing that really impressed me about the story, or that influenced me with what I do today, is that you really don't know, one, what's happening in your backyard, what's happening down the block from you. It's just so surprising. And I live probably within a few miles of these ladies, so not very far. I lived on the west side of Cleveland, and I was just really stunned by everything that took place. And more so because what had happened to them, you know, I remember the day very vividly. Like, I was on the news set, I put together like this documentary, we were talking about it. And then there was buzz in the newsroom talking about Amanda Berry, this girl's been found. And we were really fortunate because a lot of times when we talk about missing people, including these women, you don't really recognize their names. But Amanda and even Gina, the gal here in the middle, like, their families were really big advocates for them. So like Amanda's sister, she was just so good about, hey, my sister's still missing, we're doing this vigil tonight or whatever. And I just thought that was really so special that she had someone rallying in her corner, and not a lot of people really do. And one thing that, to me, even to this day, that really impressed me with Amanda is this call, and it was made to 911. And just listening to a snippet of it, even, it's just so like, oh my gosh, just thinking of it gets me emotional, but I want you to listen just to a bit of it. So Amanda, what had happened is, like, there was a moment, and kind of like, it was like late April of that year. And she had a moment where she could get free from this house by her captor. He left. And when she was able to get free, she found a neighbor, and she was like, my name's Amanda Berry. You know, I need a phone, I need to call, 911. And she made this phone call.
How are you doing? Okay, and what's going on there? Okay, now what's your address? So 17, well, it looks like you're calling for 2210. It looks like you're calling for 2210. No, it looks like you're calling me for 2217. I'm using your phone. Okay, stay there with those numbers, talk to the police when they get there. Yeah. Okay, talk to the police when they get there. Okay. Yeah, talk to the police when they get there. Okay, as soon as we get the car open. Okay? Okay, who's the guy who's the guy who went out?
His name is Ariel Castro.
All right, how old is he? He's like 52. All right, and even Amanda Berry, I've been on the news for the last 2 years. Okay, I got that here. I already know. And you said, what was his name again? Daniel Castro. And his white flag or Hispanic? I'm Hispanic. And what's he wearing? I don't know. His name right now. When you left, what was he wearing? Talk to when they get there. Okay. They're on the way. Talk to when they get there. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Not exactly the best phone call you want to have with a dispatcher, certainly, but very emotional, like just thinking about that day and everything that certainly Amanda's going through in the rush of the moment. This is her time. She escaped. She's able to call 911, and then just everything took place. It was just really, I can't even describe it. It was just something that I don't think I'll ever experience in my lifetime. It's not even about me, but I'm just like, when witnessing all this, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is just unreal. Like I said, Amanda, she was known in our community because of her sister, and I blessed her sister for what she had done for her sibling. But when the girls were found, I know in our newsroom there was a lot of buzz because we're like, oh, we know who Amanda is, and I know, like, even we knew who Gina was, the youngest of the girls, just because she also had some family. They were very good advocates for her, but unfortunately not everybody, like Michelle, for example, she just didn't have people rallying behind her. And it became like really apparent to me in our coverage and our storytelling, just how important it was to have someone who supported you or who was speaking for you. And eventually at my last TV station at Fox 8, they've done a really amazing stuff since all this. And I'm so proud of them because they, and including other stations in town too, they crafted a series where they do a missing persons report every day there. And they have Amanda actually showcase those stories for the community. And I'm like, she's just an angel. Like, and they all are, like, they all are advocates for women who are either in, survivors of domestic violence or, for human trafficking, missing children. They're doing things that I think became very important and apparent to them too after living that life. And I know, even though it's, 10 years since then, it's just, I have a feeling like this will be their life, and hopefully they'll find it to be very fulfilling. It's a lot to put on a person to think like I was 17 or whatever, and this all happened to me, and now this sits on me for the rest of my life. But it was something that just really stood out to me. And so when I came back here to Wichita, I came back just a handful of months after that. And that just always had kind of been in the back of my mind, like just what's going on around us and all that stuff. It's just very eye-opening. And it was really interesting then to see the coverage of everything on the news, because this was an international story. I mean, when we were out where the girls had lived for that time, I mean, it was just like wall to wall TV news, live trucks, these big vehicles, like semi-truck size from all parts of the world. And people were just really invested in this story because like us, we were just so curious of what happened to them and how did this even happen? How did this guy get away with this? And okay. So a number of years later, a big story had popped up here in Wichita, and it was of a boy in 2018, really early that year, who went missing. And I don't know if you all have heard the story of Lucas Hernandez, probably not as much as certainly those 3 young women from Cleveland, but there was a boy who went missing from the Wichita community. He's about 5 years old at that time. And I mean, just look at his precious face. His name's Lucas, and just seeing him, you're just like, he's so adorable. And not that, adorable, not all kids are precious, but when you see his photo and you hear about him being missing, you're just like, oh my gosh, like, how could this happen? And one thing that we had kind of I guess kind of behind the scenes in the news. We all have our thoughts about different stories we cover, but the story just didn't seem to, at least us, to add up about this boy. So there was a claim like he had wandered away from his home and that he had disappeared, and there's just no trace of him. And it just, to us, it just felt like, well, we figured, he's school age, you think something like this just couldn't happen. And it certainly can. But just a lot of the stories behind like a person who allegedly was involved with this, it just didn't really seem to add up to us. And it led, though, to me, moments that were just so powerful, just like with those women who went missing. So it was just a matter of days later where people in the community were like, okay, what can we do? There was supposedly the woman who was caring for him. It was like the girlfriend of the dad. She had said, oh, this had happened, or, whatever. There was a little bit of information police had shared about the case, but it led to people, like these dozens, and really ended up being hundreds of people wanting to go and search for him. So they went to this one park that it was thought, this really big park in Wichita. And the lady, so we have this camera, this photographer right here, the lady here that's standing in front of them in the black that's facing this group, her story, she's amazing. Her name's Sheila. And several years before, she had a child who went missing. And unfortunately, her child was a young boy with special needs, and he ended up passing away. He had, I believe it was autism, and he had wandered and he had drowned. And it was just so sad, but she had become such an advocate in our community for cases. And this was a story, just like with me and so many others, we just felt just so passionate about it. We were like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And so she helped lead these searches. And it was just really neat to see like all these people, they'd come and they'd link their arms together and search these fields, and nothing ever came about. And this search for the boy, or the numerous searches for the boy that we had hoped, eventually they did find him, kind of like early summer. It was sort of like late May or so, when his body was found in an area further away than where this was. And that was actually led by a tip by a private investigator, which was really helpful with the case. But to me, watching this and seeing the people, and I mean, there were businesses who wanted to be involved, and even some of them had contacted me and they're like, how can we help? Like, we want to provide lunch for these people so they don't have to worry about that, and they can, keep doing their thing. And I just thought that's really, really special. So between these two big stories and so many others along the way, I just thought, I'm like, there's just so much public interest in missing people. And it's neat to see the stories of the good. And it's important to see the stories of the bad outcomes too. We certainly want to see survivors and people who are living their life to the fullest, or as full as they can. But even in the case of, if we have a sad ending, like the case with Lucas, the interest is there. People want to help. They want to provide that closure. And I think that can lead to great things. So that year when Lucas's story had popped up, I asked my boss, I'm like, hey, I really think that there's a value. And I felt like at the time I wasn't doing as much as I could as a journalist. And I told him, I'm like, I feel like I can create this franchise on missing people. Like, I want to call this, stuff. I want to focus on missing people's stories and share a story every day. And I think people would be really interested in it. And one thing that my boss, Anthony, I mean, he's a cool guy. He's no longer a manager at my station, but he was like, oh, Annette, I don't know, like, do you think people really care about it? Or do you think that you can get a story every day? And I'm like, oh man, I think we can get a story. Like, we could do multiple stories a day. There's just so many. There's a need out there. And there is. But I made calls to all the different counties in the state, all the different, I contacted every county sheriff's office. So all 105, that was fun. And then I also had called the major metro police departments and said, hey, would you guys, do you know of anybody who's missing and all this stuff? And it worked out. They were really helpful with getting me information. It was kind of hard at first because they were like, what are you doing? But it led to it led to, I think, a really great path with what we've done. And we've shared a lot of really cool stories of success. And then, we've helped provide that closure for families, like I said, which I think is just so needed. And so when looking at that, here we go. I'm going to pull this back up here. We've done a lot of work and it's good work though. We have this promo here that they created, and this is kind of neat, I think, because it's gained a lot of interest.
The work that gets done with missing in Kansas is bringing national awareness to a worldwide epidemic. But the change still starts here in Kansas. If you know of a missing person story, submit it today on cake.com/missing. Missing in Kansas with reports every weekday only on Cake.
So with Missing in Kansas, we share the stories every day. We do one in the morning, and then we share the same story, hopefully the same story, or an update on a story in the afternoon. And it's starting to be quite a success. Looking at the numbers with Missing in Kansas, and also just overall. So on any given day, there's about 5,000 kids who are missing in the country. If you break down the numbers in the state of Kansas, which I don't know if you all have ever looked, but the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, they have a website and you can look up missing people on it, which is awesome. It started just a handful of years ago, super helpful with what I do. And I love having access to it because I know usually, and not everything on it is perfectly accurate, but I know if a case is open or if it closed. And on there, on any given day, there are about 600 people who are missing, and about half of them are kids. There's probably more than that. The database isn't perfect, so it looks at how old a person is today. So if a person went missing 20 years ago as a child, it would consider them to be an adult today, because there's always the assumption that the person is alive, which is important, but they were still missing as children. So I think that number would actually be much, much higher than what it reflects. With Missing in Kansas so far, in the 5 years that we've had the program, I've shared about 1,600 cases, probably more than that. I've created my own database and all this stuff. And it's been interesting to track all that information. It's kind of challenging because a lot of cases, especially youth who go missing, who might be runaways, for example, it changes every moment. I mean, the stories always evolve, and that's okay. When I look at the data and the value of what we do, I think it's so important to especially showcase the stories of kids and our community. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is a really great resource for me, in addition to stuff that we have here in the state and different advocacy groups like Kansas Missing and Unsolved and such. But NCMEC, they say that of the 25,000 cases that they saw last year, 1 in 6 children reported to them were likely a child of sex trafficking. So they were likely a victim, whether it was something that, took place within their family, if they ran away from home and they got involved with a bad crowd, whatever the case is. I mean, that's a stunning number to think about. And they say it could even be higher than that. There was a handful of years ago where there was a girl missing from Wichita, and it was such a shocking thing to me. She went missing from Wichita, and I felt so bad because I felt like a lot of people were not in her corner. She had gone on a trip with her mom. Her mom had worked in the beauty industry, and she was out in LA with her mom. She supposedly, according to her mom, ran away. And I hate the term runaways, by the way. I just think it's awful. But she supposedly ran away, and eventually she got into like prostitution and stuff. And it was just such a wild thing. And I had heard about it because there was some buzz on the internet about her being interviewed by like a documentary filmmaker. And some people said, hey, I think this girl is a girl you've either featured or a girl from Wichita. And I looked into it, and what angered me about that case is the girl was she was 13 years old and she was missing, and no one was helping her. And so I had contacted every contact I knew. So I called, Wichita Police, Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, the KBI, just every agency that I could. And I'm like, there's this girl and she's in LA. And granted, I know LA is a big city, but I'm like, she is being abused and no one's caring for her. And it took a little bit of legwork, but I got LA police because I was able to figure out, based on following her stuff on Instagram, of where she was. And I gave them like a kind of a rough location. I'm like, I'm pretty sure she's in this hotel or in this area. And they were able to track her down and they were able to help her out. And I thought that was just amazing. Yeah. It was like, oh my gosh, like it happened. And it was just amazing to see, like, it didn't take a whole lot of work. It just took someone caring about an individual to bring some action to that. And sadly, we don't, not that I need to go and praise myself for my work, but because the girl's so young and there's just a lot of wishy-washy information, we don't share all that stuff on the news. But I'm like, it's so good to know, like inside, I'm like, we really did some good stuff here. And it really is just a matter of people caring. And I wish that girl's relationship with her mom was a little better, to where maybe that wouldn't have happened or whatever, but I don't know their family life and I'm not here to judge it. All I am here though, I will judge like law enforcement or whatever sometimes, but it's just like, to me, I just want to make sure that people are doing okay. So she's a little bit better now. She's about, I think she's 16 now. So, and she's been in and out of that scene a handful of times, which I think is frustrating. But also I think it's really hard for someone so young to be able to understand life outside of that. And so I keep trying to find what's going on in her life. She's not as active on social media, but interestingly enough, that documentary filmmaker that had interviewed her years ago, he still has contact with her. And I actually had contacted him initially when looking for her and stuff, because he was very helpful with that. He didn't realize she was so young. He knew she was young, but that was just really interesting. So something very unexpected. I would never have guessed a girl from Wichita would be sex trafficked in LA of all places, and that we would be able to go in and help with the blessing of the internet. So there's been other good things too. I think covering cases of youth is very important to what I do. Those are the cases that are big, that pop up. But there are other cases that I think are very valued as well. Like, for example, cold cases. So cold cases might involve, like on your screen that you're seeing now on the left, I've covered stories like there's a boy here from the Wichita area, Adam Herman, who went missing back in the late 90s. And no one knew about him being missing until almost another decade later, when family, his adoptive sister was trying to track him down. And that's been real interesting. So that case is so frustrating to me. It's one of, I would say, if I had a choice of cases I want to solve, it's one that is on the top of my list. This boy, he was adopted. He was in foster care. He was put into foster care with his sister because there was alleged abuse in that home. And then there was alleged abuse in his adoptive home. He ran away from home. His family had removed him from public school, but his other siblings were in public school. And to me, those are all signs of possible abuse. And I feel like he really fell through the cracks, but that's my speculation and research. I will say it's kind of frustrating too with his story, is that it took a lot. We've had to put in all these requests for documents from back then and stuff, and it's very costly. And law enforcement, unfortunately, at times, not in all cases, but they're not super forthcoming about stuff. And even the stuff that we paid hundreds of dollars for those documents from the 90s, early 2000s. And a lot of it's redacted, just blocked out. They don't want you to know anything. And I'm like, I get it. It's an investigation. It's current still, but I'm like, what are you trying to hide? And so trying to work around that, to me, is really tricky. And then there are other cold cases that have led me to travel. Like with Adam's story, I traveled to Indiana to visit his biological dad. I took a road trip out there. There are people in different parts of the state where I've just, traveling is a big part of this. I think you need to be on the ground, you need to be knocking on doors and stuff. And I think it's a good thing. It's a lot of work, even for the runaways and such, but for these cold cases, it takes a lot. And sometimes law enforcement, like I said, sometimes they're really cool about helping you. And then other times they're just like, no. There's a case not too long ago. I had asked law enforcement, I'm like, hey, can I get some info on this case? And I noticed these two people went missing at the same time. They were friends who disappeared at the same time. And one of them's listed as missing and the other person's not. And I'm like, how can that be? They both were together. Like, this is a pair, it's a combo. And that law enforcement department just refuses to change that status of that other person. And then there are cases where some law enforcement, like in some of the bigger police departments, like one of them, I had contacted them for cases, and I might contact them like every month or every other month or something. And they were so bothered by it that they're like, yeah, you can just look at the state database, and if they're no longer listed as missing, then they're found and safe. And I'm like, well, that's not always true. I'm like, some people, things are cleared accidentally or not listed, or sometimes someone dies or gets hurt. And I'm like, you need to be really transparent and help me out. And I'm like, it's not that hard for you to look up a case number, but it is what it is. So it's fun times. But I've really enjoyed things throughout this whole journey. We've had a lot of great things that have come along the way too. I really like how some stories have come full circle for me. Some of them, like, for example, I've covered them from years ago when a person was missing, and then, or I do unidentified persons cases too. So with those, I've had some where we've actually found out who that person is, and it's just like, oh, wow. And then we get to learn their story and help their family get that closure. I've had some recognition along the way, certainly, and it's not about awards and stuff, but this is me accepting a national award. They give one out every year through the American Legion. It's called their Fourth Estate Award, and they give it to a TV person, a print person, and a digital person, or I guess I should say organization, every year. They don't usually give it to an individual, but they gave it to me for missing in Kansas because I thought that was pretty cool. And that was very sweet of them. I've had plenty of nominations for other things. And then I've had recognition in other ways, like the LA Times, when the story of Gabby Petito popped up less than a couple of years ago, there was a lot of conversation about missing white woman syndrome and how missing persons cases are covered in the media. And I was really amazed. I didn't even know how really this journalist, I kind of know how they found me. I had done interviews before with researchers at universities, but this one journalist from the LA Times focused on my work with missing in Kansas and how, I don't really think about race or anything like that with the missing person stories we share. And we share a story every day, so we have plenty of stories that we can share. But I really think it's important that people of different communities, thinking of missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, and the Black community is certainly one that I feel does get underreported, and we could do better. So the nice part about missing in Kansas is that it widens the scope to not just cover the important stories of Gabby Petito and other people in the community, but maybe in underrepresented parts of our community. So I think that's important. And we do more than just the people too. Like, I also share topics that are relevant, like talking about, internet safety, talking about human and sex trafficking. Things that are still relevant to the topic that people may not think of. If y'all ever get a chance, as I wrap up here, missing in Kansas is still in its early stages, I feel, even though I'm 5 years in, but this is a QR code that can link you up to all my social media pages: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I never thought I would be on TikTok because I feel like I'm a little too old for that audience, but I think there's value because there are a lot of youth there, and a lot of what we do, I think, is really relevant to who they are. The cool part, I would say, with talking about the LA Times article and all the stuff that I've done a lot of interviews in the past few years about missing in Kansas. There's this talk, we're in the development stages. It's so early though. These producers from LA have had a lot of interest in making Missing in Kansas a docuseries on like a streaming service. So that's something that we're very, very early working on. I don't know if it'll happen because that conversation started a little more than a year ago, but it's exciting to think about how we can make a much bigger platform for this community that is very, very important. So I'm just so thrilled and honored to be able to share these stories every day at my TV station. I never thought that it would be what it's become. And with Missing in Kansas, I have a much bigger vision of where it will go. We'll just have to wait and see of what I'm capable of, because I like to be very hands-on. I want to do some podcasting with Missing in Kansas. I have my thoughts on how I could do that and other big projects. So fingers crossed it all works out. But if you all have questions or something, I mean, feel free to throw them at me. I haven't even popped up the chat here, so I sincerely apologize if anyone said anything. But do you all have any questions or anything or comments? I mean, it's just, it's wild to see but like I said, how it all kind of started and where we've gone. So, oh, I see Jim has his hand up.
I actually have 3 questions. By the way, this is wonderful news. I've unfortunately not seen it since we're over here in the Kansas City area.
Yeah.
The first question is, how typically in the morning and evening, how long does your segment run? That's the first question.
Mhm.
Second question is, do you ever get law enforcement providing you these age advanced photos that you use in the segments? And I guess the third question, do you have a good feel for what % of your segments actually deal with human trafficking cases?
Sure.
So I hope if you go over those again, if you want me to.
Yes,
Those are
that was
2
that first
questions.
question again. I'm sorry.
The first question is, how long does a segment last?
Oh yeah, it can vary for sure. So some of the segments, and I will say it's kind of a brief, the concept was kind of brief. Like we go and we share a story of a person. So we'll share their picture. I share the stats about them. Anything that I know, I'll share it as long as I can verify it through family or through law enforcement. Sometimes the internet's all wonky and I don't trust it. And a lot of people lie to me. So that's always fun to navigate through, because I want to make sure I'm sharing trustworthy information too, not just rumors. The segment itself, it might be as short as 40 seconds. It could be long as a few minutes long, depending on how in depth we go. Typically, it's usually about a minute and a half. So there's that. As for the cases related to human trafficking, I don't always know. I will say law enforcement isn't always, and it depends. It depends on the department. Like there's some departments like our Kansas City Police Department, love their department. The police chief down there, he was one of the very first to help with the series. And he is usually good about, even if it's off the record information, he'll be like, okay, I have this case, but he's like, off the record, this is a sex trafficking case. But I think that's really important for law enforcement if they can tell us that, even off the record, because I mean, well, one, we wouldn't really want to point that out on our broadcast because we don't want to put someone at risk, but it gives me context of, okay, this is, certainly we need to share this, but we need to be like really methodical. And so I'll ask them, sometimes I'll ask them if maybe someone had tipped me off to it and said, hey, this girl, she's involved in whatever, or this boy, whatever. And so I'll check with law enforcement, and usually they're pretty good about it, at least giving me that off the record detail. But I think it's valuable. But yeah, I don't have like a stat or anything. And it's unfortunate because I think these cases are so multi-layered too, that it's probably a number of factors of why someone is missing. I would say as a whole, a majority of our cases are cleared. Like about a year or so ago, I went and I audit my cases pretty regularly, but about 90% of them are cleared from when I report them to when I audit them within that year. I usually audit within a couple times a year, a big audit on the cases. So that's good to have. But I have like, whenever I'm on like maternity leave and stuff, I share a lot of cold cases in my absence. So it kind of changes the numbers a little bit. And there was one other question. I'm sorry.
the reason I asked about the age advanced photos was that I was
Oh,
curious
yeah.
if that was really, was that helpful in closing these cases, or do you think that that actually serves as a good way to locate some of these people, particularly in the I would think in the trafficking cases, there's really not too much in a aided, but for the children, it certainly would make a difference.
Yeah, that's a great question.
And children get trafficked too.
Oh, 100%. And I think it's so, and I often try to remind people when we do talk about those trafficking stories involving kids that, it's often, you don't think about it, but it's very close to home, and you probably know somebody who is involved in some way, which is so scary to think about. I've had a chance to speak to some of those age progression artists, and I mean, what a gift they have. Like, I don't even know. I like for them studying the history of a person and their family, because they'll take a picture of the child or whomever, and they'll take pictures from family members from, of what they look like when they were that child's age, but also how they look now. And they do all this stuff. And I don't know how they do it. And sometimes it's spot on. Sometimes it's not so much. I mean, just that's life. I can't think of a modern case in Kansas where we've had a cold case that was cracked based on an age progression. We did have last year a case where there was an unidentified body, and that body was of a young woman, a teenager, who was found. I can't remember if it was Utah or Arizona. I was on leave at that time. I was off of work when that case had popped up. But they did have a progression, or not an age progression, but they did have an artist who went and kind of reconstructed how that person looked or would look like. And I just thought that was really amazing to see. I don't think it was quite precise, but I guess it's not that far off, but I mean, because they're working with remains of a person versus, someone who you have a vivid picture of, but it's a real gift of them for sure.
Thank you, Annette. That's really good.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be quiet and let somebody else ask a question.
No, you're all good.
Annette, this is Sharon. What percentage of folks that are found alive in Kansas?
I would say a big majority of them. Now, right now, we're in a very weird season where people are hunting, whether that's for animals or for mushrooms, or they're just out more because of the weather. So we have seen, like, within the past couple of weeks, it's just been, or past month even, some cases where like human remains have been found. And I just think it's super fascinating to see those things pop up. Because when those remains are found, of course, like, I'm immediately looking at my database and saying, okay, like, for example, there was a person's body who was found over in East Kansas, like within this past month. And the description, even though it was skeletal remains, it kind of fits this one case of a man who went missing in that area within the past 10 years. And it's not too far from where he was last seen. So, I've been speaking with law enforcement, with the family and all that when those cases pop up. And it's really a challenging conversation when you're approaching a family. But fortunately, with a lot of the colder cases, I've gone and made those conversations beforehand. So at least I've had that door kind of open to where it's not so awkward. But you want to be helpful to them either way, and letting that be known. A majority of the cases, though, I mean, it's really just like every year, and I was just looking at my database the other day, it's probably less than 5 or something of the people who are found that end up dead. And my notes, at least, of cases we've covered. There might be more than that in different parts of the state of, maybe it's something that I'm just not as aware of, but I mean, it's a good number, but I mean, certainly I would just love to have these cases closed more than anything too.
Well, and I'd also like to ask you, so I know sometimes that journalism gets a bad name because, like, you're talking about sort of like the swarming of all the journalists at these events and stuff. And I imagine that many of the families are grateful for your help right? And
Mhm.
looking for their missing. So how do you kind of manage that professionally, those two things at once?
I think that the nice part is like I would say definitely have built a good reputation in our community of being an advocate for people. And we just don't have that kind of treatment from like I'm not trying to knock any of the other journalists in town. I think we have great journalists in town and across the country. It's just a matter of making yourself known and being that figure. And I try to go to events and all these different things, whether that's related to missing people or not, to help build that relationship with people and letting them know that I'm really here for them. And that, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if I get the interview or whatever. I'm just here to help. Like we had a girl who she went missing about 2 years ago here close to Wichita, and her body was found just like maybe 2 weeks ago. And I don't know the circumstances of how it was found, but we just know a man found it in this field. And so I don't know, I assume he was hunting or something. But anyway, I fortunately have been covering her story for a while and had opened that line of communication with her family. And I just told them like, hey, if you need anything, we're here. If you have a fundraiser, an online fundraiser for funeral expenses or something, we can help share that. I'm like, we don't have to have an interview. We don't have to know your business. And a lot of times with these cases too, I mean, it's challenging. Some families are very grateful. And I would say some families, maybe they're not, I wouldn't say they're ungrateful, but they're definitely like, they want that once things are figured out, whether their teenager is found or whatever, they just want it to be private. And I totally get it. So I'm like, I just let them be. So navigating that is hard for sure. But, I just want to respect these people as best I can. I think it'll mean more in the end.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, that did. That was awesome.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good.
Does anyone else have questions for Annette? You've given us so much to think about, Annette. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing on our behalf.
Mm.
I think it's so important to our families, to anybody's family, to find out what has happened to their missing loved one. And it's just not knowing the horror of that is pretty overpowering. So thank you for your work. And
I mean,
thank you.
anything to help them. I mean, I would say, when all this had started too, one thing that I had noticed, especially, is just how we had a need, because we'd have moms and dads and cousins or whomever message us on Facebook or call or email and say, I have a missing, my sister's missing or whatever. And we'd be like, well, we don't really cover that kind of thing because it changes so fast. And it's so hard to report when you really have nothing to share other than their photograph. And so to give them that platform is amazing. So we're so proud of it.
Yes, as you should be. It's a real gift. So
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fantastic presentation. Thank you. Wow. Just thank you so much. This was fantastic. So before I turn everybody loose,